Welcome to the Infra Insider podcast from Infra-Be, a leader in renewable energy and infrastructure executive search. Join us as we dive into insightful conversations with industry leaders, pioneers and visionaries shaping the future of infrastructure and renewable energy. Discover the latest trends and innovations and challenges driving the transition towards a greener and more resilient future. Please remember to like and subscribe. Our guest today is Guy Lavarack, a tenacious and detailed-focused Chief Investment Officer with considerable experience of originating and executing renewable energy transactions. Over his career, he has successfully scaled a renewable energy business, invested over 100 million in equity capital, and achieved tenfold portfolio growth in 6 years during his illustrious career. Guy has an interesting career, spending time at Blackfinch Investments, but more recently moving to Luminous Energy as a Chief Investment Officer. Luminous Energy is a clean energy development company at the forefront of the global renewable energy revolution. In business for 10 years, with a development partners on over 4 continents, Luminous has a global reach, a solid reputation with very exciting prospects for growth. Today, we are going to cover his leap from investor to developer. We're going to be looking at Luminous more closely and Guy's new role as CIO, but most interestingly, Guy's perspective on the global renewable energy market. Guy, welcome to the Infra Insider. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on.
Thanks, Daniel. That's a tremendous introduction. Thank you. A lot for me to live up to there. But thank you for a very flattering overview of some of the highlights today.
Listen, I can only work with facts, and you know, I hope it was accurate, and I hope it's done the introduction justice. That being said, you know, an introduction always comes best from the horse's mouth, so to speak. Guy, tell us about yourself. Tell us about your career and how you are in the role you are today. I think we had a chat the other day, actually, and I remarked on how interesting it is to come from an investor into a developer. How did you get here?
Thank you. Well, I think the first thing I'd say is, for everyone who knows me, I'm definitely someone who, you know, I'm a strategist. I like to plan. And so I'm not going to pretend I haven't tried to put thought and plan into my career, but absolutely plan A, I think, went out the window a long time ago. And, you know, I'm very proud and pleased with the career I've had to date, but ultimately it's something that's happened a bit more by accident. And I've kind of, it's been a journey, inevitably, and I've sort of felt my way along that road as I've gone. Just to sort of position it for you at a big picture level, I kind of think about it as the sort of the light in the dark, the pre-renewables phase and the sort of current renewables phase. So I was very lucky. First 10 years of my career I spent in structured finance. And I say lucky because I think that was just a great proving ground where I ultimately learned my trade. I'm not sure everyone's a fan of the term financial engineering, but there's no doubt you earn a hard skill set in how to finance companies. And I had a grand tour across a number of well-known UK banks on the sort of structured finance side, initially looking at it on the debt side. And then I moved on to the equity side, where there's a lot of focus on the growth and the growth story there. And then through the financial crisis, moved on to the portfolio side. And there the focus was on the cash and what the cash is doing, and, you know, obviously restructuring and protecting value. So I had a great training ground over 10 years, but I always had a strong desire to sort of be the person borrowing the money rather than the person lending the money. And post the financial crisis, I decided to make my first big leap, if you like, out of banking. And as I said, I'm not going to pretend that I picked renewables from afar. I spotted a role that seemed sort of appeal, and it was a blend of all of that financial expertise that I'd gained over 10 years, and then this new sector that I knew nothing about. And I was really lucky. I actually started with a developer called Wind Prospect. And so I've come within my renewables journey from a developer into an investor and then back on the development side. And I'm really pleased that I had the opportunity to start on the development arena, because ultimately I learned the nuts and bolts of projects, project value, what makes them value, how to protect it. Certain things I just don't think you'd ever learn sat behind a desk as an investor. In a wind context, you don't necessarily automatically think about blade over sail, land boundaries, access issues, shadow flicker, noise, some real sort of fundamentals of, in that case, specific to wind. And I had 4 years there, and I had a great boss, and I learned a hell of a lot. And
mentioning any names?
Well, Arno Tire was my first boss at Wind Prospect, and then ultimately ended up working for the owner, Ewan Cameron. And yeah, a very passionate group of people and company.
Fantastic professionals, yeah.
And that sort of brings us to 2016, where I moved to my recent role with Blackfinch, as you said, investment director. And I joined them at a really interesting point in their trajectory. They had about 100 million of assets under management, and they had already done some deals. They'd done 4 deals all in the solar space, 3 ground mount, 1 rooftop, but relatively small as they were then, sort of fit assets, sort of 15 megawatts in total. And my remit was to build a portfolio and to diversify it. And I brought a wind background, obviously, coming from Wind Prospect, and that's what I did. I went on this huge growth journey with them. And over the last 6 years, and you mentioned some of the numbers there, I guess I was fortunate to work for an investor that had ready access to plentiful capital. It was relatively cost efficient, competitive capital, and it was a very competitive market, but we succeeded. And probably my time there ended up doing 15 or 16 different deals, all in the UK across wind and solar, and ultimately scaled that portfolio from 15 megawatts to 150 megawatts. So yeah, I suppose a roller coaster, if you like. 6 years of deal making.
I think the sector was on a bit of a roller coaster as well. I imagine at the start of that tenure, the renewables was quite tough, wasn't it? It was more difficult to invest. But I suppose midway through to the latter end, the market got more buoyant. It was easier. There was more opportunities to invest, acquire, and develop, maybe.
Yes, I started afresh in that role, so I had to build an origination network and build a set of advisors. I would say the role got infinitely easier, because as you do more deals, you obviously can embed the learning from each deal. I developed a very strong network of trusted professional advisors, and they stood me in good stead. So yeah, look, the common theme throughout my whole career has been transactions, and there's a reason for that, because I love the intensity, the cycle, the ebb and the flow of deal making and deal doing.
Do you think that your earlier career working on the debt side, working in a bank, do you think that kind of, I suppose, created who you are today in terms of bearing that foundations, those lessons? Maybe it gave you a better understanding of risk, when it comes to investing. I suppose where I'm coming at it from is someone looking to get into a renewable energy investment role. Do you think bankers make good investors?
Yes, I think they do. To be honest, they probably make the best in some respects. Obviously, I think bankers get beaten up at times for being too conservative. So there's a discipline that comes with approaching it from a cash flow lending perspective. And I think that's a very good discipline to have. Particularly, you can't get away from modeling in this type of transactional role. And if I hadn't had my 10 years in banking, I wouldn't have developed the modeling skills that I utilize every day now to do the current job. So I think, yeah, for anyone coming into the sector, I'm not going to say don't start straight away in renewables, but certainly one thing that I didn't realize at the time was I was learning an awful lot that was standing me in good stead. and there's definitely merits in getting experience in other sectors, and certainly banking and structured finance is a great proving ground.
So having been on this journey, and we talked about banking to Win Prospect to Blackfinch, and now where you currently are at Luminous, and we're going to look at that a bit more closely later on in our conversation. What would you say the most valuable lessons that you'd learn along the way? It might even be a story of success, it might be a story of failure, but it'd be interesting to know, you know, what changed, what had an impact on your vision and your perspective, and maybe the way that you that you'd look at a deal.
Yeah, it's a great question. I suppose there's some specifics, and then there's some more big picture points that I could allude to. In terms of the specifics, obviously, when it comes to transactions, there are certain things that you need to know and understand quite well, some quite technical things. And you know, in joining Blackfinch, I'd never done any solar deals. I hadn't worked with rock assets. When it comes to commercials, you've obviously got a couple of options around share purchase agreement or asset purchase. And then on the sort of financial side, there's the sort of tax and accounting. You've got to be a bit of an expert in tax. You can't get away from it. I've never really held my hand up as being a tax expert, but when it comes to M&A, you can't avoid it. And I've certainly learned a lot and made a few mistakes in the early days, not understanding tax as well as I could have done. So that's a sort of maybe the micro level. At the macro level, you know, some of the stuff that I've really enjoyed is recruiting, building, leading, and retaining a team, and motivating that team, and working with very passionate, motivated, hardworking people. And ultimately, towards the end of my career or time at Blackfinch, I was surrounded by some areas, and one of them in their specific area could probably do the job better than I could, and that made my life a lot easier. So I suppose I would put the emphasis on building good teams, working with those teams, and then when it comes to M&A and deal doing, there's no such thing as a perfect deal. It's about doing the deal, and to do a deal, you've got to be commercial, you've got to be pragmatic, you've got to solve challenges as you go, and build those strong relationships that I mentioned already, having good advice. So one of the most valuable lessons I learned was paying for and using good advice to manage risk and get deals
and good
done.
Recruiters, of course, good recruiters as well.
I should have mentioned that. Apologies.
No, that is that's interesting. So what actually led you to joining Luminous? Because I think there's an interesting story behind that, wasn't it? It wasn't a headhunter, it wasn't a recruiter, you didn't apply for a job. Yeah, I think it's more interesting than that.
Yeah, it's definitely a backstory. As I mentioned, I did 15 or 16 deals at Blackfinch. One of those deals was a deal called Clunderys, which is a solar farm in North Wales. It's actually an asset that Luminous originally developed and got to a position of ready to build, so it had planning consent. And it came at a time when, back in 2019, Luminous, and as was the rest of the industry, thinking about merchant wind and solar, and the nature of the Blackfinch business is about capital preservation. And so relatively risk adverse, and obviously in a merchant environment, you don't have any revenue certainty. So I was looking for an opportunity to sort of dip our toe in that water, and Clunderys was a 6 megawatt asset. Obviously, with the benefit of hindsight, we should have doubled down much more significantly than 6 megawatts. But ultimately, I was introduced to Luminous by one of the non-execs at Blackfinch, and built a good relationship.
I bet they wish they didn't introduce you now.
No comment. But basically, there's two principals here who the original founder owners of the business, Jolyon Orchard and David Bryson, two fantastic guys who built a really strong business partnership. And I ended up buying that asset off them. And there's nothing like doing a deal with someone to sort of get to know them properly and understand how they behave. And I think through that process, we sort of developed mutual respect. and collaboration, sort of kept in touch. And from a timing perspective, and we'll get on perhaps to talk about it in a bit more detail, but Luminous is going through a transition from sort of a develop to sell model to more of a develop, build out, own and operate. And that played really well to my experience at Blackfinch. So they approached me about helping them with that challenge. And for me, it was about a new challenge and about them as individuals and about the opportunity that just really I found compelling and exciting.
Let's talk about Luminous a bit more. You went into it a little bit further then, but Luminous, they've been in the market for a decade. You're operating across 4 countries, if that's correct. Maybe even more. The what you've achieved, I find quite special, especially when I compare you to others in the marketplace. And you've done it before everyone else. You've done it before the mad rush that we've seen over the last 3 years. But yeah, Luminous, what is their vision? What do their assets look like? And where are you going as a business? What's the goal?
Yeah, so I sort of alluded to a little bit there. I mean, firstly, I should say, yeah, you're absolutely right. Fantastic business, and I can't take much, if any, credit for that. A strong partnership that's been built up over 10 years, and as I alluded to, now a very good team. In terms of the vision, it's about scale, and it's about leveraging the platform that we've built over 10 years to achieve that. And in terms of the market, when I look across developers, I mean, there's obviously a proliferation of developers in this country and elsewhere, everything from your one-man band to sort of global IPPs. And I think
they all started as one-man bands, which is so exciting. The entry point, especially even over the last 24 months, I suppose things have significantly slowed now. But it is amazing. It's lots of these large companies. I'm not going to name them because it wouldn't be right to, but one-man bands that have grown extensive pipelines and have now got RTBs ready to go, and teams of 60 or 70. It's amazing, really.
It is, and it's fantastic to be part of that story and to have seen that happen elsewhere as well, as you alluded to. But I think what's happening in the market is this sort of and there's starting to be a separation. If I can put it in masculine terms, separation of the men from the boys. And what I mean by that is, ultimately projects are going upscale and they're taking longer. The barriers to entry have probably been quite low historically, but are getting higher. And to compete in that environment, you need greater scale, more sophistication, deeper access to sort of capital, and not everyone can access that. And I think in the future, there will be some consolidation where certain developers who've got maybe some projects, some of them perhaps a bit stuck, look to sort of divest of those, partly because they have to, may not have the cash resources to keep pushing them forward. And I think Luminous is in a really fortunate position, as you alluded to there, over a 10-year track record, operating in 4 different countries across multiple technologies. That gives a degree of protection because you're from policy changes in one particular, and that's really benefited the company over its recent history. And so it's about that platform and scaling it, and then, as I alluded to, that transition from develop to sell to sort of develop, build out, own and operate model, and that's what our vision is for our company.
What countries are you currently operating in at the moment?
So we're obviously headquartered here in the UK, extensive pipeline in the UK, and then outside of that, we've got a presence in Australia, Chile, and the US, and we've got firm ambitions to open in 3 new markets over the next 3 years.
Can you say where they're going to be, or maybe not?
Well, the honest answer is we're still figuring it out. I mean, I think definitely, obviously, an opportunity for at least one of those to be in Europe, because of the scale of the opportunity there, and it's sort of, relatively speaking, on the doorstep. We haven't identified which markets they'll be, but we're in the process of trying to identify them.
Okay, so that's interesting, and it's difficult, isn't it? Because there are so many options, and every country comes with its challenges. Everyone thought the UK was the best place, but obviously we're confronted with a difficult and very congested grid, which has of course delayed lots of projects in the UK. But yeah, every country has its challenges, and I'm sure as an investor, you need to calculate those risks accordingly. The business, so it seems to have obviously done a fair amount around solar. Are Luminous open to different technologies outside of just wind and solar, for example?
Yeah, absolutely. Particularly around storage, albeit obviously the storage market in the UK is starting to become quite overheated in some respects if you look at the tech register and how much capacity is waiting to connect. But I think one of the things that's really stood Luminous in good stead over the years is we're very nimble and we're fleet of foot, and we can make decisions quite quickly as a result of that, and therefore latch onto and spot opportunities. And we were very, very early adopters of energy storage as a technology. So you may or may not know that we developed a project called 90 in partnership with Low Carbon back in 2016. It's based in Wiltshire. It was originally a 100 megawatt battery storage project. I understand it's on phase 3. It's now 150 megawatts. But if you think about 100 megawatts back in 2016, that was probably Europe's biggest project at the time. Right now, it would obviously be considered average or small. But back not that long ago, 2016. So we were really lucky to sort of be involved in that project, and that has led on to bigger and greater things in that market. So another project I'd point to is a project called Hams Hall, which is a project we developed as a JV with Penzo Power. We still have an interest in that project, but we sold most of our interest in it last year, and it's still being developed by Penzo Power. But that's a 350 pushing on to sort of 400 megawatt battery storage project near Birmingham, which is definitely a significant project by most people's standards. And we aim to repeat that in other markets such as Australia and in the US.
Yeah, wow, I hadn't realised you were so early on in storage, because it is still in its infancy if you compare it to other subsectors. How do you see the storage market evolving? How do you and I suppose what other countries do you think are accelerating the investment about storage, or around storage, should we say?
Well, certainly in terms of our biggest market, I'd say it's the US. So a huge opportunity in the US to latch onto energy storage. And we've just recruited a team over there, headed up by an individual who's leading that opportunity for us. And it's ironic, actually, with the US being such a big market, it's behind other European markets like Germany, like the UK, which are more mature. So I think a big part of what we can do as a developer is take our expertise and experience and take that to other markets and sort of apply it there. And the challenge in the US in particular, obviously you've got different grid regions which are operate under different rules, but they have big grid deposits. So there's an extra challenge there. It's probably a good thing because, as you've seen in the UK and alluded to on this discussion, there's a proliferation of projects now, and given we've operated historically on a first come, first served, ironically, a lot of those projects are now sort of almost blocking development for others. So at least in the US, although there's a challenge to raise the grid securities, it does stop people from just taking grid spuriously.
The US, so I mean, I'm glad that you touched upon this. I think the US market is really, really interesting. It's quite fascinating, isn't it? You noted there it was behind, but obviously, the size of the country and the resources available, it's going to be growing at a rapid rate. Do you think it's difficult to gain entry into the US as a new investor?
Like, do you mean a developer such as Luminous, or an actual investor? Yeah.
Could you go on your own, or do you have to pick up a partner to get into those projects?
I think Luminous is lucky because we already have a presence in the US. We've been developing there since probably 2016, 2017. We've sold projects at scale to light source. So it's not a new market for us. I think there's definitely a challenge for others. You know, perhaps there's some developers who are finding it tough in the UK, who can see the opportunity, but actually how do you make that happen? Yeah, there are inevitably, as with any other sector, barriers to entry in terms of understanding the nuances of that market. And there are things which are carryover and are consistent, but there are things which are specific to those markets, particularly around grid and permitting and the process. And
in the US market is obviously quite interesting. You mentioned and you started talking about the grid there. Not looking for you to be an expert on the grid, because it's it's a whole topic in itself. What are the greatest barriers in the US? What makes a project more difficult there, would you say, to develop?
Well, I mean, let's start with what makes it easier. Obviously land is abundant relative to the UK, and the legal aspects of securing an option to lease is a lot more straightforward, which is helpful. You mentioned there are different regional grid areas who operate separately. So you have to, and they have, it is a first come, first serve, but there are grid deadlines that you have to sort of hit those grid deadlines. You can't, if you miss the deadline, then you then have to wait till the next one. So there's a timing aspect to it, which is different to the UK. And then you have to put in big grid securities to sort of demonstrate that it's not a spurious application. So that's an extra challenge. So I would say when I think about the US, permitting and land availability is a lot more straightforward, but grid and grid security and grid certainty is more challenging, or has different challenges relative to the UK.
Be it that the US are in the earlier days of their renewable energy rollout, I suppose it's great because you can look at other countries and other regions and learn from the mistakes or learn about things that went well. Guy, it's been amazing talking to you. Learning about your career, learning more about Luminous, and I think that lots of our viewers and listeners, I'm sure, will be looking into Luminous and understanding a bit more about the business and hopefully following your growth. Guy, as a seasoned investor, I'd like to ask you, and I think it would be an interesting one for people to listen into. Where do you see the market going over the next 2 years?
Ooh, crystal ball time. What I think about that is, I suppose what you're saying is, where's the growth going to be? I don't know if I've got a unique answer to that, but what I would say is, and play back to you, and it's quite topical, I think, this week, is we've obviously seen huge strides on decarbonisation of electric networks. There's still a fair bit to go there, but the bit that hasn't really attacked in the same way as the sort of heat and transport sectors. And there's a role to play there, obviously, for hydrogen, particularly in relation to ships and trucks. So the interesting thing about hydrogen is a bit like battery storage. You sort of think, oh, I've heard it and I think it's coming, but actually it's arrived. And if you're not too careful, you'll sort of miss the boat. So I think over the next 2 years, there's definitely going to be more of a rollout in that space, and more of investment, obviously, into decarbonisation and heat. And you've seen announcements this week from Octopus in the sort of heat pump arena, and given how dominant they are, how much access to capital they control, and how vertically integrated they are, you can't really ignore that. So that's one area. I think another area which is sort of the time is now is C&I solar. We've seen huge opportunity there, and there's still significant inroads to be made for very obvious reasons, given recent elevated power prices. I think the challenge with C&I solar is obviously trying to achieve scale and speed. They're not the easiest deals to do. I have huge admiration for anyone who can get those deals done, having sort of worked on many private wires in my time. This week I saw EDF just bought a business in the C&I solar space. So lots of opportunity there. There's opportunity around, grid services as you take off conventional generation and you lose inertia. A few people have moved into synchronous condensers, the likes of Quinbrook and others. I think Conrad Energy as well. Not an area I know an awful lot about, but I was really surprised actually. I was asking someone recently, well, how big is a synchronous condenser project? And they sort of said, well, a small one's about 40 million. So, that's scale in most people's language. And then I think other areas where I see significant growth would be in the area of digitization and sort of software services to renewables. When I think about the businesses, one called Senon, which is started by a couple of ex-colleagues of mine at Wind Prospect, and also business like Above, who are bringing digitization services to renewables developers.
Are we talking about renewable energy tech?
Yeah, I mean, the low-hanging fruit is gone, isn't it? So to be successful now, you've got to be a lot more clever about site selection, and also that comes back, as we talked about through this session, grid congestion. And if you're not careful, you could waste an awful lot of money trying to develop the wrong sites. So I think there are opportunities to use software to be cleverer about it, more efficient, and make more informed decisions. And there are definitely people out there who have already developed products that can support in that area.
Yeah, and it's certainly an area from a recruitment perspective that we have been following with great interest. There's lots of new businesses popping up and growing very quickly. Your perspective is so interesting, and I think that if you compare where the industry was when you started at Wind Prospect many years ago to how it is evolving at a rapid rate. We are entering into a whole new world of investment criteria, and everyone's looking at it in a much more intelligent way. Like you said, the low-hanging fruit has gone, but I'm sure professionals like you and companies like Luminous are well prepared for the future renewable energy landscape.
Couldn't put it better myself. Thank you, Daniel. Really enjoyed the opportunity to talk to you about the subject matter today, and to reflect back over the last 10, 12 years, which has been hugely inspiring and motivating for me professionally and personally, and looking forward to the next 10 and 12 years and hopefully achieving some good scale and growth at Luminous.
Guy, we have followed your career with great interest, and as always, it's been an absolute pleasure to have this conversation today, for you to share your insights, share your journey, and give us your general perspective on where the market's been and where it's gone. And I think additionally, I think it'd be interesting for other professionals in the earlier stages of their career to maybe look at their own career and see how you've moved the way through from banker to developer to investor back to developer. The future will be interesting. I think we should pick this up in another 5 years' time. Hopefully we'll both look a bit younger, you never know. But Guy, an absolute pleasure, and thank you for being a guest on the Infra Insider.
Thanks, Daniel. Pleasure was all mine.
Thank you, Guy.